Hello, everyone, and welcome to MuniciPality, a podcast exploring the wonders of local government through discussion and special guests. I'm Natalia, and I'm here with my co-host Adrian and youth organizers Mia, JJ, and Priya. And we're here to talk about youth organizing, and we're so excited to have all three of you on. So thank you for coming.
Awesome. So I think we'll get started. For our new listeners, my name is Adrian. I'm one of the co-hosts as well. We're going to get started by asking some kind of intro questions to get to know more about y'all and how you got started. So if you could each please introduce yourself with like your name, pronouns, age, and where you're from if you'd like to, and then share what you're currently working on. That would be great.
I'm Mia. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from Minnesota. I work currently with the Minnesota Youth Climate Strike, and I'm pursuing a fellowship through an organization called Student Voice. So I'm working on several journalism projects right now with that organization, which is very exciting.
My name is Juwaria Jama. I'm a 17-year-old organizer from Minneapolis. I'm the state lead for the Minnesota Youth Climate Strike, and I do poetry and take commissions via Instagram.
My name's Priya. I'm a organizer from Minneapolis with Minnesota Youth Climate Strike, and I just graduated this year, so I'm focusing. I worked at a job through the elections, and now I'm focusing more on the fight against Line 3 and other local fights we've got going on here.
Thank you so much for sharing. And so, kind of to start off and discuss your journey with local politics and organizing, when did you realize that you wanted to be involved with politics and local organizing?
So I've been involved with community organizing since 8th grade. Through my old school, I helped organize a fundraiser in 2018 for Syria. But when I was a freshman in high school, that's kind of when I really started finding my base in organizing. I got involved with a youth climate organization during my freshman year, and through there, I started getting involved more with environmental climate justice organizing and branching out for racial justice and political work.
Yeah, JJ, Priya, and I all kind of met around the same time. JJ and I became friends over a bag of Sun Chips at this one retreat I think it was after we were introducing the Minnesota Green New Deal, I think at that event or something like that. And so I've kind of been organizing since, I want to say fall or winter of freshman year. So it's been about 3 years now. And it's been pretty great so far.
Yeah, I think I started around the same organization and event that Mia was talking about. I think the first official position I had, I got a couple months after that from just Mia texting me and being like, hey, do you want to join us?
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I know Juwaria went into that a little bit in their intro, but does anybody else want to share, or if you want to share more about what was the first thing that you organized or that you helped organize, and kind of how did you do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of us started, it was the first major event that we organized was the first climate strike. It was March 15th of 2019, I think. And that was when JJ and we just joined the climate strike, I think probably 2 months prior. So that was the first major event that I helped organize. And I've kind of been a small part of other bill writing events and things like that. But the first major event was definitely the March 15th climate strike. And it was very stressful. And I think all of us were really thrown into the deep end because there's no tutorial or guidebook or anything like that. And it was a really difficult it was just hard to kind of manage everything, trying to balance school and organizing an event and sending out press releases and taking calls and all of that during school. But it was, I think that was the first big event that I helped organize.
I think that was the first climate event I was part of too. I think the first thing I actually ever helped organize was a gun violence walkout, and I think all I did was borrow a megaphone for it or something, but still I think that was my first school walkout event.
Yeah, in 8th grade, I went to a really, really small school, and we didn't really have clubs or things that people were in. So a couple of my friends and I created a club called Eyes Open. And in May of that year, so it's an Islamic private school that I attended, and during the month of Ramadan, we had an iftar, which is the meal that you have to break your fast. And we had a fundraising event there. And that was the first event that we ever organized. And because it was such a small school, we were able to get half of our school to come. That was really cool. But Yeah. Also with Mia, I think the first actual like climate event that I organized was the March 15th strike.
That's so cool to hear that, like, even though you guys came from very similar places, like, I think you guys all bring a different perspective, and like it is being thrown on the deep end, just like Mia said, because there is no instructions. And so it's really inspiring and cool to see such young people really take the reins into their own hands. So thank you for sharing that. And so, kind of leading into that, since there is no guidebook, what is something you wish you knew when you started organizing and when you first went to that climate strike, but even like more recently in more recent organizations or organizing things, like did you wish that you knew something and that you're like, now that I see it, it's obvious and we should have been doing this from the beginning? So
I think something that I wish I knew is like, we're in this together. It's not one person has to take up all the work. Because I think especially within like youth organizing and organizing spaces in general, sometimes it looks like one person is predominantly like doing all the work, but it's more of a collaboration to organize and to like actually get things involved. So I think that would have been helpful to know early on.
I think also like a lot of young people get kind of stuck into this trap of thinking that quantity is better than quality. And so it's one thing that I wish I had told myself, or kind of while I started getting into organizing, that it isn't the amount of events that are held, or it isn't necessarily how large the crowd is. It's more how good the work is, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. But I really wish that I had realized earlier on that the quality of the work is a lot more important than the number of organizations or really small things like that everyone's a part of. And like JJ said, it's called community organizing for a reason. It's the community is probably the biggest and most important part of any organizing effort that we all do.
I agree with Mia, and going off that, I mean, just like technical organizing stuff, I wish we'd understood how to like take the momentum you have from a big event and like turn it into, like bring people into your organization, and like, I don't know how a campaign arc works, like just like things like that, where, because I think a lot of times youth organizations get stuck in the trap of like what happens after the big flashy event.
Yeah, I understand. I totally understand that feeling. I also, I think like one of y'all said, I helped organize a gun violence prevention walkout in high school, and that was before I'd had any kind of actual training around organizing. And so we just like had a walkout and we're like, we're calling for gun violence prevention. And then we didn't do any kind of like follow up or whatever to like hold our officials accountable or anything like that. So I was super lucky to go through this program through my student government when I was a freshman in college. That was kind of like a grassroots organizing training, which is like, was really, really awesome. I didn't even think I realized how cool it was at the beginning. But anyway, so I hope that a lot of young folks who want to get into organizing have the opportunities to do that kind of stuff, but not everybody does. So it's good to know that, you can also just learn through doing, which is awesome. Anyway, a little bit of a different next question. I want to ask, how does your creativity and art influence your work? I wanted to kind of ask this because I heard that some of y'all were like poets and writers. So just interested to hear about your art and creativity.
Okay, I can take this. And I hope all of you guys do too, because everyone here is a very talented writer and poet. But for me, I try to bring creativity into organizing through I really enjoy journalism, and so I've kind of been trying to pursue that extracurricularly for a bit. And I really, whether it's writing a press release, short notice, or I've had to do that on several occasions where I've texted JJ like, hey, I need a quote. Can you please send me a quote for this release that I have to send out in the next 2 hours? And so I've really kind of tried to bring that into any organizing that I do, though it isn't necessarily the most creative writing type of like art form, I guess. It's helped me with public speaking a lot for sure. And just, it's been really nice to see how you can make an impact through words and not just large events and flashy kind of press releases or press calls or anything like that. And so how doing smaller interviews and working with other organizations can really be important through journalism.
I think art and activism is like so important. I think art is like a huge part of activism because I think you're able to like draw people in without necessarily like using words. And I'm a poet, and for our September 20th strike, I performed a piece instead of writing a speech. And for me, it was like easier for me to like connect with people through poetry than it is through like writing a speech. Cause I think people are so used to like hearing speeches, but it's different when you're, like presenting it in like a poetic way, or when you're like presenting it as an art piece, because of like, I think people are able to interpret poetry and art so differently than you can through like words that clearly have like a way that it's meant to be interpreted. So I think it's a huge part of the movement. I think, just having like art there just brings people in, and it's such a beautiful thing. I love it.
Yeah, I think the connection you had with the crowd on that day was just like, that was amazing. I feel like for me, it's more the other way around of like, how does organizing influence my art? And like, even the pieces that aren't like overtly about, activism or issues or something, I feel like there's just kind of a like way an organizer brain is like oriented that like gives a different perspective in pieces of writing.
Yeah, I don't think that JJ is giving themselves enough credit, because the poem
They are not.
I felt like such a proud parent that day. It was incredible. And it's been really amazing just to see how their poetry specifically has influenced so many. Like, you've become like a sought after poet for events and things like that. And so it's just been really incredible to see firsthand from the outside just how art and writing really does influence forms of protest.
Really well said, and it makes my like heart so happy. I love at Sunrise, we have a lot of songs, and so certain songs bring me back to certain protests, and like I remember singing those songs with my friends like at protests, and there's something about it, partaking in those kind of performances, it like strengthens your community and your movement in such a way that it's like it's almost hard to put into words. So it's so nice to hear that like you guys are also incorporating stuff that you love outside of activism, and so that's so cool. But anyways, kind of going again a little differently, talking about how to organize. And I think something that helps us learn is talking about when we struggled with something. And so when, what was the biggest challenge you faced while organizing, and how did you overcome that? And like, kind of what wisdom can you share with other people?
Drama, I'd say, has been like the biggest challenge for most of us. I don't speak for everyone, but in my experience. And yeah, I mean, we're obviously still learning, but I think just recognizing that like, your organization is not a friend group. It can overlap with a friend group, but like everyone has to get along in a way to do the work, but that's different than everybody, being best friends, and just like figuring out what you can work through and where there's actual differences in like, opinion and organizing, and where you just need to learn to get along.
Yeah, exactly what Priya said. So to go in a different route, because Priya said it very well, one thing for me that was difficult was I'm naturally a disorganized and forgetful person who is not that great at time management. And so being put into a situation where time management is all that is important when we're trying to get all the work done is something that I definitely struggled with at the beginning, and still even now, just trying to keep myself on top of everything and not getting burnt out too fast. And like Priya said, it's very important to recognize that even though we are still in high school and we're all in the same grade and a lot of us may be friends, there's a work-life balance for a reason. And so when you kind of conflate those two too much, it becomes really difficult to really get the work done. Those are two things that were something that I definitely had to learn.
Yeah, I think both of you guys covered it perfectly. Like, I think burnout was one of the biggest things, because what I mentioned earlier about like learning how to work together, because I think in the beginning of like organizing, it was a lot of like doing a lot more instead of like delegating. And I think that like very easily created burnout, and that was really hard to navigate, because again, there's no like tools on how to deal with like on how you organize correctly. And when burnout happens, it's really hard, because burnout doesn't just affect you, like it affects the work that you're doing. So I think that's probably one of the most difficult things, like as an organizer, but learning like how to separate work from life, and also learning when to take breaks has been important. It's been a journey of learning how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's needs to be like a bigger conversation around burnout, like the number of people who just like work themselves to the bone and then have to just be done. And I think it's also like it's not a matter of just taking a break for a couple of weeks and then coming back because you can't function the same. If the way you were working was burning yourself out, you can't take a couple of weeks and just be able to, expected to go back to doing the same thing again. You have to figure out how to delegate and like, yeah, I think it's something I'm still learning how to do.
Yeah, I think it's definitely fair to say that all of us have dealt with our fair share of burnout and just kind of recognizing how to adequately support our own mental health in organizing spaces, especially as we're talking about kind of dismantling these systems of oppression that have accumulated in so many injustices that happen today. We can't create those same systems within the organizations that we're a part of. And so recognizing that we need to take a different approach than we were always taught and always said, like, this is the right way to structure something. This is the right way to build an organization. This is the right way to go about this process. And finding more creative and sustainable ways, like not only for the planet, but for our own mental health and sanity, to really focus on that. Like Priya said, there is not that much of a focus on burnout in youth organizing. And that's something that a lot of us have really had to learn and are still kind of working to solve.
Yeah, I definitely feel a lot of that. I was super lucky this year to, well, as a DFL organizer this year, we to be unionized, and it's different when your job is organizing than when like you're just organizing like in a volunteer capacity, I guess. But like just even the concept of having like a group of people that are looking out for the welfare of the folks doing the work, like that's basically what a union is, at least in the way we used our union, was really awesome and was super helpful for me doing that work. So yeah, I think I will move on to the next question now. I want to, since I know that y'all have had a variety of organizing experiences, what has been kind of the differences or similarities, I guess, with working with national versus local kind of movements in organizing? And what has that been like for y'all?
So I can start with this one. I've worked in both local and national groups and positions, and I can say with very strong certainty that local organizing is much, I guess, healthier and more impactful and generally more thoughtful about how plans and these organizations were kind of created. And so I think that, I started out with the Minnesota Youth Climate Strike, and that's kind of where I got my start in a lot of organizing. And I think that the work that we've been able to do locally has been really incredible. And we've seen a lot of really wonderful local change. And I think that oftentimes we discredit the importance of local organizing and local, I guess, movements. And we kind of try to find the national flashy movements, and we forget about the really important things that are happening. Like even in Minnesota, like Line 3, that's not necessarily getting national attention, but it's one of the most important things happening in the state right now. And I know Priya can talk more about that, but there's too many local challenges to focus on a big national movement and have the same impacts that you do locally.
Yeah, Line 3 is finally starting to get some of that national traction that Standing Rock did, that Keystone XL did, and they're all very similar. I can talk more about that if you want me to, but I feel like that's a different tangent. But yeah, I think every fight ends up being a local fight eventually. Like, governors, city commissions, little bodies like that have a lot more power than they want us to think they do, and it takes a lot to make them change their minds. But it's definitely more surmountable than the federal government.
Yeah, I think you guys both covered it. I haven't worked on a national level. I've only done like state and local. And it's kind of like the same thing. I think that like nationally, it's a lot harder to reach people because you're like working from such a far away place, and it's harder to have like the same impacts. And so like starting locally, I think always working locally within your communities and within like the places that you're near, I think they have the most impact, and it makes the most sense to start there.
Hell yeah, we love local government here, so we love starting local.
Agreed. So now kind of changing topics again a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about coalition building. And so what tactics do you use to build a strong and diverse coalition, and how do you make sure that everyone's voice is heard, including your own? Because I think sometimes it's hard when you're trying to make sure that everyone gets, a seat at the table and everyone is heard. Sometimes you overlook yourself. So any experience with that and I guess coalition building?
Coalition building is always going to be messy and kind of hard, but it's definitely just worth it. Yeah, I'd say honestly, I haven't had a hard time. I feel like in climate strike work, there hasn't been that much difficulty getting our voices heard, just because the media has that thing for youth voices, and I think it's a little bit weird. And oftentimes maybe actual, adult people of color have something more relevant to say than whatever white youth show up. But youth voices get heard pretty easily when they're able to speak.
Yeah, going off of what Priya said, the media has a really weird thing around youth voices, and I think that, well, some of it is deserved for some people. I think that there's this strange obsession with watching young people speak on topics that we all could learn about a bit more and do more physical work in and community work in. And so it's, again, like the coalition building. Priya did a really amazing job doing outreach for the Minnesota climate strike, and it's really amazing to see the attention that Black Visions Collective has been getting, because they've been a really fantastic organization from the beginning. And so I think that we've been really lucky to have amazing partners, and working with SEIU Local 26 on a few things, which is a labor union. We've been working with them on a few things in the past, and either Priya or JJ can talk more about that if they want to. But I think that building a coalition, like Priya said, it hasn't been too difficult for us, which has been very lucky.
Yeah, building that coalition with SEIU is probably the thing I'm the most proud of as an organizer. And yeah, it's been easy because we have this weird positioning as a youth organization that kind of, the media has a thing for it, politicians have a thing for it. It's weird, but it works. And so if, maybe it got attention to this campaign that was actually led by a union of janitors, but we were able to, provide support and work with this amazing organization of organized labor, and actually were able to win something because they won a green cleaning program. Sorry. And yeah, the community support allowed them to, threaten to strike, and their one-day strike allowed us to win the program.
That was so awesome. I'm really proud of y'all for that work. Okay, another question for you. I feel like we talk about COVID a little bit in every episode, but I do want to ask, how has COVID and all of the impacts it's had in Minnesota, I guess, affected your ability to organize and who you organize?
So I think with COVID, some of our organizing shifted, but not as much. I think because we're youth organizers and because we're statewide org, so many of us lived in like different places and were able to meet in person. And so we were used to doing online meetings. And so that didn't really shift during COVID. But I think what changed with organizing during COVID was like addressing organizing and like how we were organizing, like how important the work we were doing, and like how to actually address the community's needs. Because I think especially with like climate organizing, it intersects with so many different things, but I think it was very easy to like not see the intersections before. But looking at like the unhoused community right now and the encampments going on, and then looking at like all these different things, like students who don't have technology at their houses and people impacted by COVID, it's been really interesting to like see how our organizing has shifted into like trying to do more mutual aid and trying to have more support for Line 3 protesters, and like figuring out like what we could do online. So I think it's definitely changed the conversation of like who we're trying to organize and like what work we're actually trying to do.
Yeah, youth organizers knew about Zoom before it was cool. But everything besides that has changed, I think. And yeah, I mean, I miss in-person meetings a lot. Like that was the sort of community building you don't get on Zoom. But we move.
I was also going to add, regarding like Line 3 and like organizing there, how has COVID affected that? Because I imagine like Indigenous communities are obviously more vulnerable to COVID because of a variety of reasons. And so how do you continue organizing with those groups in like a way that's safe? And obviously they're like, how do you do that? Because that's something that I don't really know much about, and I was just really interested to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that it's so crazy that they're going through with construction right now. Minnesotan restaurants aren't open. We aren't allowed to, have gatherings with anyone outside of our household, but 2,000 out-of-state workers are coming in to build this pipeline. There's license plates from Ohio, from Texas, from all over the place, lined up in Palisade right now. And it's crazy. It has already caused a COVID spike in Aiken County, and it's going to cause more. And so that becomes a question of how do we organize against this without contributing to the same thing? So far, that's just meant that people are driving themselves. There's not buses coming up. There's not carpooling as much. And everyone is camping. Fortunately, all of the events happen outside. So that's what's kind of really saved it. But yeah, it means we have to make sure that everyone stays individually. We can't be planning things that maybe people had planned before. So it's definitely a big point of conflict.
Thank you for sharing. It was just a fascination that I had because I've been seeing more stuff about it through Sunrise. And so I thought it was really cool that we could talk to someone who's kind of like on the ground doing that work because it's so important. And it's like, again, like you said, now there's more national coverage, but it's pretty often overlooked. So kind of moving on, as you guys have kind of touched on with Zoom, what has been like the most useful digital tools to continue organizing and creating strong coalitions? I mean, obviously youth has like known how to work social media and Zoom and those kinds of things a little bit faster than like maybe perhaps some older people in certain organizations. So what has been like the most useful thing or something that you discovered through the pandemic because of need that like has really changed the way that you organize and has improved like your ability to organize successfully?
I think that one thing that we've seen a major increase in, I wouldn't necessarily say for better, but I guess it's better that it's now digitized, is a lot of mutual aid networks that have been created out of necessity. And that's all been kind of pushed digitally. And that's been really great just for access, especially for those who need that aid. And so making sure that that network is available, I think that's something that is developed because this pandemic has gotten rid of so many in-person gatherings and distributions. I think that also utilizing the power of, I guess other forms of social media like we were using before, that we've also seen this whole weird Instagram infographic complex that has really kind of come out of quarantine. And I do think that there's a lot of overhype about that. I think just posting something on your story is not activism, nor is it as impactful as a lot of people think it is. It has been good to increase the accessibility of some information, prove it, like given that it is correct and helpful and properly interpreted. I think that's been good, but I also think that there's definitely a danger in using that form of social media as a main source of information.
I've said it before, and this is a hill I will die on. There is no difference between an Instagram infographic and a Twitter thread or a Facebook post. And I think the Instagram infographics get a lot of hate because of the kind of bizarre nature of that So You Want to Talk About account. But I do think that there's a lot to be said for like spreading information on social media and like putting correct information out there. But also as a person, please don't believe everything you read on Instagram.
Yeah, the amount of times I've accidentally reposted something that was wrong and then had to delete it is sad. But I think that's kind of like the power of social media. Like there's good and there's bad. I think it's been very helpful for like spreading awareness about issues going on and like trying to mobilize people to like make calls or like be involved. But I think it's really hard because we're in like I think social media it's a hard thing because people just repost stuff without following it up with action. And it's hard to figure out like how you can effectively organize people because it's social media. It's not real life. So I definitely think it's helpful, but it could be better. Don't know how it could be better, but
I feel like when I see someone post a graphic, I try to like, instead of thinking of it as like, oh, there goes another performative activist who's not gonna like actually show up, I try to think of it as an organizing opportunity and like mentally be like, okay, so I know this is an issue that this person is interested in. Next time there's an event coming up, I'm going to send it to them. Or like if someone posts, a protest or something, I swipe up and I'm like, hey, are you going? Like, will I see you there? And like try to, see it as an opportunity, even though it's frustrating that it seems kind of performative.
Yeah, exactly what Priya said. Or when people were posting those black squares, I got a few people to type in donation links in the comments. And so like actually creating opportunities out of otherwise what would have been a performance. And so again, like Priya said, swiping up on someone's story and saying, hey, here's this opportunity. Are you able to donate? And then me and a couple of my friends were editing first semester essays if they donated $10 to a leftist organization led by Black and Indigenous people of color. And so like just kind of saying, how can we actually get people to do this and put the work in, even if they don't really want to.
And I think a lot of times they do want to too. A lot of people just don't know where to start. And, the opportunity they have is to repost their thing on their stories. So
yeah, I think one thing that was kind of cool, I remember I had a friend of mine who was posting all of these like infographics and all these interesting things on his story. And then he doesn't live in Minnesota, but I was able to connect him with an org in his own state. And that was like a really cool thing because like Priya said, like people care, they just don't know where to begin. And so like swiping up and like helping people navigate that is cool. Definitely.
I kind of felt like that in the summer a lot because in the summer I feel like that was when it kind of started, was like so many people just posting stuff in their stories all the time. One of the ways I've kind of worked to make like my story more productive is doing like those fundraiser like kind of matrices of like ways people can do kind of like small dollar donations to whatever issue I want to work on, which I think is fun. But anyway, before JJ has to leave early, I wanted to ask, given that a lot of times this organizing work can be really challenging, what's something that brings you joy and gets you excited about organizing?
I think community. Like, I think the thing that's not hard, I think the best thing about organizing is like the people that you meet. And I think that's what makes it easiest to organize. Cause I think like reminding yourselves that like we're in a community, like we're not doing this work by ourselves is great. And then being able to like build relationships keeps me hopeful. Cause I know I'm not the only person doing this. And I know people like all across the country and all across the world are like in the same fight. And so that keeps me hopeful. And I think also just like thinking about a better world and how the things that we're doing is hopefully going to create the world that we want to live in the next like decade or couple of years. It keeps me hopeful and keeps me energized.
Just events, when you finally like get to see people in person, socially distanced at a march or whatever, but like the feeling of actually seeing something come together and getting to hang out with people and like, you remember that it's all worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Like they both just said, though we can't really have many events right now, just out of safety concerns for the right reasons. It's always really amazing when we're all able to kind of meet in person, and we would have like Tuesday meetings. I remember that was like the day that we would have a lot of meetings, just because that's when everyone was weirdly free. And we would like go to Sencha and start planning. And then me, JJ, and Isra spent like 5 hours I think it was at a random coffee shop. I think it might have been at a Caribou trying to plan out an entire new structure for the climate strike. And so it's just kind of moments like that where you're really you're working really hard and it seems really difficult at the time, but then you remind yourself that there are some amazing people that you get to see and work with every day.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally relate. I feel like when I'm doing the hardest stuff, the people I'm doing it with are what get me through. Natty, do you want to ask the last question?
Yeah, sure. I guess we can ask one more question if JJ has a little bit more time. I guess to the young people listening who want to get involved, what advice would you give to start getting involved in organizing? Because I think like people assume that it's overwhelming. I think especially now there's not really a clear path because it's not like you can go to just some like, first general body meeting or something like that. It's more complicated now. And so what do you suggest to people? But also I think you guys have an interesting perspective starting organizing so young. I know that you guys discussed how the media has like kind of this like intrigue of young people, but I've assumed that sometimes you guys also, for being so young, are treated differently than perhaps people who you organize with that are older. At least that's my experience, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but also how would you, suggest to people who are also probably going to be navigating those kinds of situations?
It's important to remember that young people don't need to be alone in this. We have not only like the right to be involved with adult organizations, but like we should be connecting with people of all ages. And I've met so many amazing people who are really willing to like mentor and help us work through. Go find the people of color in organizations. They'll respect you more, I think, in my experience. Yeah, I'd say one piece of advice I have is that you don't have to start something if there's already something that's happening. There's usually a way you can join and, at least use the resources and sort of existing base of what's going on. And remember that you have a right to be there. The first couple meetings might be awkward, but you have the right to be there and your voice is needed. And like pretty soon you'll find people who are like-minded, and maybe eventually if you have to start something new, you can. But yeah, you don't have to be alone, and there are people out there doing the work, so you have to just find them and connect to them.
Yeah, exactly what Priya said. Also, I think one of the other things is when you keep showing up over and over again, I think adults start to get intimidated, because I think when you're there for the first meeting, they're like, oh, like this young kid is interested, but they don't really care that much. But then you show up over and over and over again, and they start to realize that you're serious about being involved. You're serious about the work that you're doing. And I think sometimes not all the time, but I think sometimes it changes and they become more willing to hear you and understand. But like Priya said, like, you're not alone in this fight. There's so many like adults and just people, like even young people who have experiences and like are able to just be a guide and a tool to help you with this. So you're not alone in the fight. I think the first few meetings are going to feel weird. You're going to feel alone, but continue showing up and making connections with people that are there to support you.
Yeah, both of what Priya and Jay said is very true. And I think that for me, it was really hard to kind of reach out initially and just say, is there any way that I can help with this or something like that? But I think just if you see an opportunity that you're interested in, just apply if it's something that you feel like you would be a good fit for. Don't underestimate the power of like a cold email or a cold phone call. The worst someone can say is no. And a lot of the times that isn't necessarily just the only answer. They'll say no, but here's someone that I can connect you with. That's how I got started with the climate strike. I filled out a random form that I saw on like Instagram. Someone was like, hey, like fill out this Google form. And so I filled out the Google form, and then I was added to a group me. And I guess the rest is history. But be able and willing to show up if that's something, like JJ was saying, just proving to yourself and to everyone else around you that you want to be here and you want to do the work is the most important step.
Before we go to the ending, I also wanted to add an important note that it's important to note that people of different identities or backgrounds get taken different. Like they are addressed differently by the groups that they enter. And obviously we need to be aware of that, because I think if like a white guy walks into a room, people are like, wow, he's taking, control, whatever, versus sometimes a person of color might be treated differently. And so we need to acknowledge those in those spaces as well, because that affects the voices that are heard. But I think that you guys really covered it well. And I appreciate you guys, suggesting people really go out there. Because I think if anything, COVID is a challenging time, but like the norms of what we should or shouldn't do have really changed, and like so many opportunities are open, because the thing is everything's online. You can join a Zoom call, so it's easier than ever in a lot of ways. And so I'm glad that you guys are still excited about organizing and are trying to get people in. So I really appreciated like all three of you coming to talk with us. I think Adrian's going to close this out.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. It's honestly been really awesome to hear your perspectives about getting involved, and you've had a lot to say about. I had a lot to say that kind of shows how thoughtful you all are about leadership and everything. And so I'm really excited to see what you do in the future and just kind of to watch you shine as organizers. So thank you so much for coming. To our listeners, if anyone has questions or responses to today's episode, please share them with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we're going to be tagging all of our guests today on Instagram too if you'd like to connect with them. We are so happy that you've all joined us today, and we hope to see you again soon in our municipality.